This is one of the hardest things I've ever written. I've been sitting for what feels like an eternity trying to gather my thoughts, opening and closing the document multiple times, staring at a blank screen until my eyes burn. I hope that what I'm sharing now can help me process and maybe, if I'm lucky, reach someone out there who needs to hear exactly this. Because I've realized that I'm not alone, that this isn't an isolated incident, and that makes me both relieved and distressed at the same time. Relieved because I'm not crazy because others understand. Distressed because it's so common that many others have already experienced similar things. What happened to me this weekend has really shaken me, and after much consideration, I've realized that I need to ask someone. I need to write it out to get some sort of structure to my feelings, and I would like to hear how others think, even though it scares me to possibly have confirmed that I've been subjected to something as horrible as I've begun to fear. I've always seen myself as a person who can handle most things, someone who won't be silenced or stepped on. Yet I feel completely powerless now. It all started a few days ago on a regular Friday evening. I had been in a really intense work period. Lots of overtime, no real break for several weeks, and I felt stressed and worn out. When some friends put together an evening at our regular spot, I first thought about declining, but realized I really needed to get out and meet people, just to let go of work, responsibilities, and daily routines for a while. I wanted to take a break from all the heavy thoughts, from my fatigue, and my constant wondering about what I'm doing with my life. I walked into the familiar pub around 9 in the evening. As usual, it was half full, quite cozy. I saw my friends at a small table in the corner where we usually sit and went over to say hi. We ordered some beers and I immediately felt my shoulders drop a few centimeters. After the first sips, I was already starting to feel relaxed. We talked about everything, work, music, latest news, loosely planned for a trip together in a few months. It was exactly the relaxation I needed. After about an hour, one of my friends joined with someone I hadn't met before. She was new to our group, a friend of my friend. She sat down with us and I immediately got the impression that she was social, talkative, and in a good mood. We started talking about music. It turned out we had very similar taste. She laughed at my, in my opinion, pretty bad jokes. I've never seen myself as a particularly funny person, but she made me feel witty. Maybe it was the beer that had started to take effect. Maybe it was just nice to talk to someone new who didn't know all my old sides and stories. It became one of those evenings when time seems to fly by. We talked about movies, books, food, whatever came to mind. I was so into the conversation that I didn't notice how the glasses were being refilled again and again. It must have been close to closing time when she suddenly leaned closer and suggested we should go to her place. She mentioned something about having a couple of good wines she wanted to try and that we could continue the evening there. I was undeniably quite drunk, but I remember thinking it would be fun to continue hanging out. I didn't have any other plans and knew I wouldn't have to get up early the next day. It just felt spontaneous and fun, so I said yes. My friends split up differently. Some wanted to go home, others thought about going to another place, but I went with her. It was probably just a short walk, but honestly, it's fuzzy in my memory. Once inside her apartment, she showed me around briefly, but we quickly ended up in the living room. She brought out 2 cans of beer instead of wine, which in hindsight feels ironic. It wasn't at all what she had talked about. But there and then, I didn't reflect on it. I sat down on the couch while feeling the room's walls almost swaying a bit. The alcohol hit hard and I noticed how my legs started feeling heavy, my head warm, and my thoughts a bit slow. She came and sat next to me, put a hand on my thigh, and I immediately felt where this was heading. In another situation, with less alcohol in my system, I might have reacted differently. Maybe responded to her initiative, maybe declined more clearly, or gotten up and said I had to go home. But now, I was in a state where everything felt sluggish. I was suddenly more aware of the nausea knocking at my stomach. I was really not in shape for any physical activity, least of all sex. At the same time, it didn't feel like an emergency situation because she didn't give me any uncomfortable vibes right then. It was more that I simply felt too physically ill. I said straight out, "I'm really too drunk and feeling nauseous. I don't want to have sex." I tried to sound firm but also friendly. She responded by nodding understandingly and said, "Okay, no problem. Then we'll take it easy. We can just sleep." Her reaction felt completely normal. She suggested we should go to bed. I thought, I couldn't manage to get home anyway, so why not sleep off the intoxication and then leave? So we went to the bedroom, and I really felt I needed to lie down. My head was spinning. As soon as I lay down in her bed, I fell asleep. This is where the scary part begins, because sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to a strange, uncomfortable feeling. I felt pressure against my body, and it took me a few seconds in my dazed state before I understood what was actually happening. She was straddling me. She was in the middle of having sex with me, despite me not consenting. I felt completely paralyzed in my body. I was so drunk that I could barely coordinate my movements. I tried to lift my arms to show that I didn't want to, tried to say stop or no, but it came out as a murky mumble. Everything inside me screamed to push her away, get up, do something. But it was like in a nightmare where you want to run, but just stand frozen. I couldn't coordinate my motor skills. My whole being was paralyzed by alcohol and tiredness. The panic grew, but I couldn't control my body. In that moment, I remember thinking, maybe if I just lie still, like a dead fish, she'll understand that I'm not into this. It felt desperate and completely absurd, but I didn't know what to do. I hoped she would give up when she noticed that I wasn't participating, wasn't reacting, and that I had earlier made it clear that I didn't want to. But she didn't care. She ignored my passive resistance, ignored what I had said earlier. I heard her own breathing, her own presence, but I felt as if I couldn't fully perceive the world around me. I was so out of it. She continued until she was done, then got off and lay down beside me. Not a word. It was as if she didn't see me at all as an independent person with my own will. I lay there not knowing how to handle the situation. I remember thinking, should I scream? Should I call someone? No, I can't even coordinate myself enough to get up. And then I passed out again, completely exhausted and affected, with a grinding feeling that something was very, very wrong. When I woke up in the morning, she was in a brilliant mood. I lay there for a while trying to sort out the night's events in my head. It almost felt like I had dreamed it, but at the same time, the memory was too clear to be a fever fantasy. The nausea was still there, but it was more from shock and anxiety than from a hangover. I sat up in bed and saw her standing in the room, dressed and bubbling. She said good morning with a cheerful voice. I was completely quiet for maybe 10 seconds while trying to find the words. Finally, I said that I remembered what had happened last night, and I asked her, "What exactly did you do?" She shrugged, almost indifferently. "We had sex," she said, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. I pointed out that I had said no, that I wasn't on board with it. Her answer cut through me. "That's just something people say," she claimed. "Everyone knows that if you follow someone home, it's understood what's going to happen." I felt my pulse rising and how anger flared up in me. I tried to gather my thoughts, explain that when someone says no, it means no. No one should have to repeat it countless times, especially not when the person is so drunk that they can't defend themselves or even resist. Then she turned, became irritated, and started calling me silly. Claimed that I was overreacting and that I should be flattered or grateful. In that moment, I got an icy feeling. I realized that she didn't understand the seriousness of what she had done in any way, or she didn't care. We got into a short but intense discussion, where I tried to get her to understand that this was an assault, that what she did was basically rape. She dismissed it as an exaggeration. Finally, I realized I wouldn't get anywhere. I got dressed, took my things, and left. Left her there in that apartment. Back home, I landed on the couch with a feeling of total emptiness. I felt shame, anger, confusion, and disgust all mixed together. One second I was convinced I had been subjected to rape. The next second I questioned myself and thought, but is it really like that? She was a girl. Can it really count as rape then? Am I overreacting? I noticed how society's expectations had crept into my brain. There are so many myths about how men always want it, that if a man says no, he surely means yes deep down. And I realized that I wasn't just fighting against what had happened, but also against all these opinions and ingrained notions that say, you can't rape a man. I went on a forum to anonymously ask what people thought. I was in urgent need of confirmation or guidance. I needed to know if I was completely off base, or if there were people who agreed with me that this was wrong. An overwhelming majority of the responses I got confirmed my experience and said that what I described was clearly an assault. Some used the word rape without hesitation. It was a relief to see that I wasn't alone. But at the same time, it was frightening. It made it all more real. It wasn't just a bad experience. It wasn't just a drunken thing. It was an assault. With that realization came the next question. Should I report it to the police? Would I really be able to go through everything it means to report someone for a sex crime? Especially when it feels like almost the entire society doesn't really believe men in this situation? I talked to a friend who knew her. She became furious when I said it was rape. She claimed I was exaggerating, that it was bad behavior from the girl's side, but not that serious. I felt myself collapse inside. Here I was trying to explain how violating and traumatic the experience was, and she dismissed it as nothing special. Another male friend I have was more understanding, but he still didn't think a police report would lead anywhere. It's word against word, he said. It's hard enough for a girl to prove rape, and now you're a guy. Not that it's fair, but you'll never win. I understood what he meant, but it felt so hopeless, as if we're doomed from the start. If the roles had been reversed and I as a guy had done the same thing to her, then it wouldn't have been a question. Then it would have been clear to everyone that it was a crime. It bothered me enormously. Still, I wasn't ready to just let it go. I started thinking about whether there was even any way to gather evidence. Because without evidence, a police report felt meaningless. I was afraid of being subjected to ridicule, to condescending comments, to being called a liar who just wanted to expose a girl. It would only make things worse. Then someone came with the suggestion, try to get her to confess in text. Text her or write online and see if she confirms what happened. I felt hesitant at first because I really never wanted to talk to her again, but the idea of maybe getting evidence weighed heavier than the discomfort. So I took courage and sent a text. It became a rather short introduction, but I asked some direct questions. Why she didn't care that I said no. Why she didn't stop when I was obviously too drunk to even defend myself. That was the starting shot for a long, bitter discussion that went on for a couple of days. We weren't polite. We threw accusations back and forth. She called me pathetic for crying over a little sex. She wrote that I should be happy she wanted to have sex with me. When I cornered her and reminded her how I had clearly said no, how I had been too drunk to physically get her off me, then came the really raw stuff. Guys always want sex, she wrote. Stop acting like a little girl. It was as if she held on to an idea that my masculinity required that I actually wanted it, despite saying no. In all this insulting, however, there were small, clear admissions. She wrote straight out that she had heard me say no but didn't care. She confirmed that she had seen how drunk I was. She wrote that she took what she wanted because she felt horny and believed that I actually wanted it. She didn't seem to understand that this, in legal terms, could be a clear sexual assault, perhaps even rape. At the same time, it felt like she got some sort of power from humiliating me. It was uncomfortable to read how she thought she had a right to my body just because she was a woman and I was a man. I gathered the conversation, took screenshots of everything. Despite being unsure if the police would even take me seriously, I went there. I had a folder on my phone with all the documentation. Inside me was a small hope that the police would see the conversation, read her clear admissions, understand the seriousness, and say, "We'll take this further." But that wasn't really the response I got. They looked through our messages, but still it sounded as if they had already from the start resigned themselves to not being able to pursue this case. I heard something like, "There's not enough for a conviction," and "We can't even start a preliminary investigation if we don't think it can lead anywhere." They weren't unpleasant, but they radiated a kind of hopelessness. And I understood that in practice, my case wasn't interesting enough or stable enough for them to proceed. My word against hers, and even though she had written some admissions, there still weren't signs of violence or coercion in the sense traditionally seen in the legal system. So there you have it. My buddy was right. It's tricky enough for a girl to win a case like this. Completely impossible for a guy. Not even with evidence and confession does it work. I've given up. It's not worth the work I have to put in. It sucks.
If you liked this story, please subscribe and give us a thumbs up. It helps a lot, and you won't miss out on any future stories. Take care and live your best life.